Bessemer Ventures needs little introduction to this crowd just based off of its size and track record. I read that the firm's been around for more than 100 years, investing out of a $4 billion fund. And Steve was just telling me that it really has the longest track record in terms of investing in health tech specifically, more than 40 years in that sector, okay? The point is, Bessemer is a key player in health tech investing today, and Steve and Sofia's thoughts on the market, their projections about 2025 are going to be incredibly powerful and useful to this group. So good to have you both. We're going to dive right in. We're going to get into the report, the State of Health Tech report that you created, but we're also going to get super practical about how we can take the lessons from that report and apply it to the folks on this call, to founders in early stage, in every stage of health tech business. But as a bit of background, as a way to get to know the two of you a little bit beyond your LinkedIn bio, I wanted to ask you a slightly more personal question to kick us off. I want to hear one thing about each of you that shapes how you invest in health. One of the beautiful things about being in the healthcare market is that it affects every single one of us. It could be a loved one's experience, your own experience. It could be a mentor that you've had. I'd love to hear something about you that we're not going to know from LinkedIn that impacts how you think about investing. Steve, maybe we'll start with you, and then Sofia.
I think I've been driven by a phrase that, my parents held me to, which is too much who's been given, much is expected. And so I think one of the reasons I invest in healthcare is that I get a lot of joy out of working in industry where if you do it well, you can do a lot of good. So I think that's what drives me. And in particular, when we look at businesses, one of the first things we look at is what kind of outcomes are they creating? I always say outcomes set you free in healthcare. If you're a startup entrepreneur, if you can create outcomes, that's what our system ultimately cares about. Outcomes are usually often tied to financial benefit for the system and for the patient and for our government, which is the big financer. So I think all of that is what this is sort of my North Star when I think about what I do.
I love the question. So I come from a family of dentists and doctors, originally from Guatemala. And I remember when I was growing up, my mom would tell me that she loves her job. And the reason she loved it is because she would make people smile. And when they smile, they would love that smile because it looked good. And I grew up always thinking I wanted to do a job that I would love to do and have an impact on people, but I wanted to have it at a bigger scale. I didn't want to just be part of the system. I wanted to change that and think about how you scale that impact. And I'm a big believer that early stage innovation, where you actually think about the payment model, the incentives, and the business models particularly, and the role that technology plays, is really going to scale that impact that you can have on a one-to-one basis, but really on a bigger group and a community. So that's why I love doing what I do.
Love it. So one reason why we wanted to have you on to this Fireside Chat was that you recently published this in-depth State of Health Tech report. Not your first rodeo. Y'all have been prolific with these reports and have really informed the whole industry. So we're going to get tactical and practical with the folks on the call, but I do want to start with some of those macroeconomic trends that you identified in the report. Folks we can share the link. They can read the whole thing. I want to just hear kind of the things that piqued your interest the most. Top line, what got you curious, what really stood out to you? Sofia, maybe we'll start with you and then Steve this time.
Yeah, I mean, at a very high level, guys, like I think we in 22 and 23, we've seen our industry go through lots of different hype cycle and really the trough of disillusionment, as we called it in our 2023 report. And one takeaway that gave me a lot of hope about 24 and 25 is we're really seeing a lot of resilience from everyone in our industry and building in this industry to focusing in what matters and really thinking about how we're going to continue impact and scaling that impact from companies. So we really saw a big cohort of companies in the public market as well as in the private market really continue to do well and really take advantage of tailwinds and really performing as well as new opportunity of lots of new companies getting started that can impact the way we do healthcare. Particularly, we're going to talk a lot about AI and all of the tailwinds that are happening, or like the big technological shifts, and what does that mean for our industry, and why there's a really big right now to adopt and digitize healthcare and the way we administer, but also deliver it. So lots of resilience and hope that I see for the coming year.
Okay, Steve. So Sophia says resilience, new AI companies. What stood out to you?
I feel a lot better exiting 2024 than I did exiting 2023 and 2022. And I hope people feel that in this room. I mean, my sister was an entrepreneur. My dad was a blue collar entrepreneur. Being an entrepreneur is like one of the hardest things and one of the hardest journeys to take. But sometimes you also need to have the right timing. And I think for the last 2 years, our sector's been in this trough of disillusionment, as Sophia said, and there's a whole host of reasons for that. A lot of, I always try to remind people, having been investing in this sector for 20 years, like we're relatively immature when you compare other sectors of innovation and where other venture capitalists invest. And one of the benefits of being at Bessemer is we invest across all different industries, and I can tell you that the maturity of the digital health industry, like it really only started about 15 years ago, right? When the government decided to give money to doctors to adopt electronic medical records, because only then did we have the data in 0 and 1 format. And so if you take a longer view, like that's actually not that long of a gestation period for industry. And it happened to be that the companies that started, 15 years ago finally grew to be scaled companies that could go public roughly about 5 years ago, right? That's how long it takes for a company to scale to that level. And, those companies went public, and our industry wasn't really well understood by public analysts because this was the first time they've ever really seen a digital health company for the most part. And then it happened to be that, frankly, the market just imploded, right? And of course, venture capitalists and entrepreneurs raised at too high of valuations and funded. We can make a lot of excuses, but if you take the long arc view, like that's the journey of our industry. Like we just had gotten companies to be mature enough to go public, and then boom, like the entire market basically like implodes. And so we did not have a great, initial debut as a sector. And we all feel that because like, honestly, the public companies are bellwethers because we need capital. We need funds bigger than Bessemer to be investing in the sector on the public side, right? To support it. And so I think we just need to remember that. And what I'll say sitting here today is I think for a host of reasons, my view is that for some of our more technology, SaaS, other industry compatriots, a company we just had go public called Service Titan, for instance, which is a great company, but sells software to, HVAC companies and other things. They just had a great public debut. And we need more of those. We need more of our brothers and sisters in the non-healthcare side that are tech companies to go public, because I think ultimately we now have a bunch of mature private companies. We can talk about the names of some, but we probably all know them, that are really scaled. And actually now many of them are profitable. And I think once the market opens up where risk is back on and growth at best investing is back on the public side, you're going to see some digital health IPOs. And I think this time, hopefully we caught more of the upward arc of the hype cycle, to Sophia's point, and they'll have room to run, and the public markets will now understand these companies, and these companies are more scaled and be successful. That's my hope for 2025, because I think a rising tide lifts all boats, and I think that'll be good for our sector. And I feel more optimistic about that sitting here today, what I know, than I did a year ago.
What I'll say also on like the private market that we're seeing of like a lot of the growth stage companies that are digital health, clinical delivery businesses that we've seen raise really successful growth rounds in the past 18 months. Those are good signs that we're focusing kind of the fundamentals of efficient growth of those business models, and we're going to see what we're hoping is kind of new blood or new oxygen to the public market on the digital health side as well, with new IPOs in the new year that would really continue to solidify that our industry is growing and kind of having new cohorts of companies continue to go out and be public. But we do think there's like a lot of great businesses that are kind of that growth stage within the iceberg of what we see in the public market, which is what we can all track on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, just to give you a perspective, like I'll just say one thing, like Livongo, which by the way was a one-of-one unicorn company, right time, right place. I don't want to say that we're going to see those type of multiples again, but when it went public, its trailing 12 months revenue was $68 million, and it was not yet profitable. I can tell you there are now a handful of digital health companies that are hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue and profitable And that's just a much more digestible thing. So that I feel like again, you take the lawn arc, like that makes sense, right? These companies take a long time to scale. They're really hard, but we know these are huge TAMs. And I fundamentally believe that they're good business models, which is why I'm investing in them. And so I think we should be optimistic that some of these bellwethers are going to do a lot better this time around. And by the way, will be hopefully propelled by a better, more favorable market for growth and risk on than the first time we entered, where it was literally like, oh, we're public. And oh, by the way, nobody wants to invest in risk-based companies. They want to invest in value-based public
Yeah.
stocks, right? So
Yeah. Well,
fingers crossed.
taking that long arc view is great and it's important, but you've also got a lot of founders on the call who are like, yeah, but what about the next 6 months?
Yeah.
So, something that stuck out to me about your report is you talked about having optimism about a quote new cohort of companies that are thriving in spite of these challenging market conditions. So I was wondering if you could kind of go into what sets this new cohort apart. And specifically thinking about folks on the call, like what's one thing a founder can do to thrive in the 2025 market and kind of shift how they operate. And I'll throw this to either of you.
Yeah, maybe I'll start and Steve will love your thoughts. So two things that come to mind, and I think they're different depending on what type of business you are. So I think we refer to the new cohort of companies that are thriving and are scaling really well in healthcare that we track for the very first time is just like this healthcare AI businesses. A new business model that we're calling kind of AI services as software. And what are those businesses? They're software companies, and then some of them are software plus people delivering a service or automating a bunch of the back office work that's being done by a stakeholder. Say, your billing on the back office. You're going to outsource all of that to a company and then they will do it with technology and a human in the loop. But we're seeing kind of really strong demand from different stakeholders, say health systems, physician offices, payers, pharma, for leveraging the best-in-class technology to really help them with the administration of healthcare, in particular jobs to be done or use cases. And that was the first cohort of companies that we've tracked because they were really born in the last 5-8 years. And then they really hit scale between 10 and $25 million of revenue within the last 2 years, just because it's been really high priority for all buyers to really think about how they're going to deploy these technologies within their workflows. So that's one on in the AI side. But then two, I mean, other business models we've always talked about, kind of tech-enabled clinical delivery and other software businesses. I think fundamentals of thinking about kind of the inputs and outputs of your business and kind of the investments that you're making, and then being very focused on the why now, I think is always important for what we're thinking about as investors on like, why should this company exist today? Why is it going to scale exponentially from where it is today to where it can be in 5-10 years? And I think really focusing on that momentum and why now and market tailwinds is very important, particularly in an era where we've came out of COVID. Telemedicine was really used for lots of different conditions, but coming out now and where we are in kind of the steady state post-COVID, why should a solution exist in a particular category that is really going to drive momentum for your business, I think is very important.
Can I give one tactical thing as well?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's all for, I agree with everything Sofia said. I think AI is an amazing moment. So if you're AI first or even AI enabled, using AI to, improve the operations of your company, like everyone knows that. But I think, back to first principles, it's always like, regardless of what your business model is, there's so much value that you can capture in the healthcare system. It's like, what outcomes are you producing? Do those outcomes lead to like a 5-to-1 ROI? If it's more than that, even better, because you can command more pricing for your customer, right? That's principle number one. Like any company that we see, and by the way, it's amazing how many startup entrepreneurs come in still to this day in healthcare and don't tell you about your outcomes and what ROI they're producing. So like my very tactical thing is like, make sure you understand that first as an entrepreneur and make sure you communicate that like to investors, because that's what gets me interested. And I assume that everyone else who's like my compatriots in this space, even though I really only know how Sofia and I think, but like start there. And then to Sofia's point, is the fundamental delivery model and cost of that scaled to what you're delivering, right? So if you're producing like 5 or 10-to-1 ROI, can you capture enough ARPU, average revenue per customer? And then can you serve that ARPU at attractive enough gross margin to sort of feed the machine, right? And what is that? What does those unit economics look like? And how much cash does that mean that you need to raise? Like, I think it's really first principles, right? Like, and some of it's assumption based and some of it you're going to figure out as you go along. But if like you can figure that out, like at an early stage and communicate that, like that's investable. It might not
Yeah.
be investable by Bessemer, but if you can prove that, that ROI is going to yield some return on capital, like that's an investable model. It just depends on how you finance it and what the valuations are and all that. But you can still do really well as an entrepreneur at a $50 million exit, at a $100 million exit, at a $1 billion exit, at a $10 billion exit, depending on what the model shows, right?
Yeah. You write in the report that the bar for success has risen, that the investors are demanding, quote, clearer paths to profitability, more efficient growth. So I think the $1 million question here is, what are the stories and metrics that actually will get a firm like yours, or another firm, actually excited? So, Sophia, you mentioned the why now. I'm going to push back on that and say, what's the why now story that is resonating with you today and in 2025? Um, yeah, what is the reason to exist that actually gets Bessemer excited?
I think for any firm, including us, there's like a category AI companies. And if you have AI, like, just to be honest, like we are like venture capitalists look for like what have been the areas that venture capitalists and entrepreneurs have made a ton of money. It's been fundamental platform shifts, right? It's been, moving from on-prem to cloud, the iPhone moment, right? I think this is one of those moments. So like, honestly, pattern recognition would be say, go hunt there. And that's what everyone's doing. But that doesn't mean you just have to be an AI first company. I think if you're not an AI first company, you have to that's where the what, like that in of itself is just enough of a why now. Like you will get attention and you will get a meeting because you're doing something interesting in AI. I honestly believe that right now.
Yeah.
Then if you're not that company, you really have to have like a clear, why does this need to exist in the world? Why am I the right person and building the right team to go after that? And then it's the first principles that I would say, like, how are you going to actually make money, right? Like we are investors after all, right? I do this because I love healthcare, but you need to convince this person that if you're going to invest $1 or $10 million or $100 million, like it's going to be an engine that's going to crank out, like going to be efficient. And I think so there's a real focus on that, right?
Yeah.
And in this era.
To add to that, because Logan, your comment on what do we need to see, I think it really depends on the stage that you're in and in the business model. And we've written over and over about this, and happy to share more about the particular business models if anyone in the call has questions. But I think for our stage, we're assuming if the audience is mostly kind of seed, early stage founders, the big question of Series A milestones always comes up, and it's a fun one to talk about, because what does product market fit mean for your particular business? And the kind of efficient growth is always going to be most exciting to any investors on the venture side. So high growth, but making it in an efficient way is what your North Star should be. So what does that mean, right? We're not saying kind of spend $5 to earn $1 in gross profit. That's gonna that raises the questions on like how scalable a business is. But for us, like having high growth and momentum in a business in the past few quarters is something that like will always catch the attention of an investor.
Yeah, and by the way, if you are spending $5 for $1 gross margin, that's okay. We get that. Or by the way, we are very much early stage investors. So me and Sofia and we're happy to talk about all the ways we think and anecdotes and examples. But I think just in that point, so we get it. If you're spending $5 for $1 gross margin, that just might be where you are at the stage, and that's okay. But then you have to answer how that gross margin is going to improve over time. You don't have to have the data to show how it's going to improve. You just have to show sort of like the big step functions and investments you're going to make, whether it be technology or, whether it be, people, or whether it be, some kind of unlock that you're going to get that, $5 making $1 gross margin to be $5 spent making $10 of gross margin. Like we understand that there's a journey. It's like thinking about how you're going to tackle that journey at the early stages. That's part of the conversation and the discussion, but I would come prepared if your gross margins don't look good right now to make sure you explain how they're going to look good in the future, right? Because we're used to taking that leap of faith.
You mentioned anecdotes and stories, and maybe it would be helpful for you or either of you to share a recent investment you made, a company that you partnered with that you got really, really excited about, and you could kind of unpack why, whether it was just the profitability, whether it was the path to profitability. What was it? What was something that got you really excited recently?
I'll talk about one, so you could talk about another. I would say one of the ours that's not necessarily AI driven, just to talk about a non in the other category, is a company called Mural Health. Mural Health is focused on clinical trial payments and using sort of best in breed financial technology software to enable participant payments for those patients that are part of clinical trials. And still today, 80% of clinical trial payments are done via check, if you can believe it, or ACH. It's not like your modern experience that you'd have in any other sort of payments rails. Like payments rails haven't come to the clinical trial space, and yet there's a lot of money that's actually dispersed in when it comes to clinical trial payments. And so, why were we interested? And this is an interesting one. This was a entrepreneur and a slide deck, and this entrepreneur had actually built the leading clinical trial payments company like a decade and a half earlier, and grown it from zero to, $100 million in revenue, had raised only $3 of venture cap, $3 million of venture capital. And doing so, really had bootstrapped it. He came from a background where he really needed to own a lot of the company to make his life, And that's how he chose to. And by the way, it worked out really well for him, because he ultimately sold it to private equity. Turned out, that company, he stayed at the company's done well, and he moved on. And finally his non-compete expired, and I tried to invest in his first generation company years ago, because I really liked him, and I liked a lot of the components of what he was doing, and he had really shown that he was scrappy. But there was an opportunity, because he didn't want to raise that much money. And then he reconnected with me, and he said, Steve, I want to go and do this again, but I want to do this on, using modern technology, and go. And he loved the industry. He thought that this was a really interesting wedge, and he thought that, obviously getting patients paid creates a lot of loyalty to the patient, and that there was ways to build a broader product offering than he had built in his original company. So he has broader visions, but the initial wedge was like, holy cow, to Sofia's point, the product market founder fit there was unbelievable, right? Even though it was honestly a person and a couple slide deck, it was like, how could I not invest in this? And it was really interesting, because you don't often see entrepreneurs want to and do the same thing over again. Lots of times we see entrepreneurs who made a lot of money in the tech space and want to come and do good in healthcare. This is an entrepreneur who had made a lot of money in the healthcare space and literally wanted to do the same thing again, but do it better. Like, that was really interesting to me. So
Yeah.
as a profile. So I think that there are like many different types of profiles of
Sure,
startups that we back, but that one was interesting.
but in this case, the track record was huge. The proven profitability was obviously.
And the drive to do the same thing over again, but do it better, is like a really unique thing. Like, you don't see that I honestly don't know many people who have done extremely well and then want to do the same thing again, but do it better. Like, that's a really that early stage, that founder motivation of why they're doing it is like really, because we're making like a 10-year bet on this person. Like, what drives this person? Like, that was really unique to me and Sofia when we saw that. And so we chose to make the investment, and it's been a great ride so far. I mean, it's still very early, but we're really excited to be invested in Sam. So there's lots of different stories, but that one I like a lot for just the unique founder market fit.
Yeah.
And one other thing to add to that one, there's also, he had the experience of knowing the market and wanted to do it again, but there was a really strong why now on why he wanted to disrupt his own old company, because it was legacy like financial technology, and he was like, no, we need to do better by patients and have like modern infrastructure on the fintech side, and like technology can help you do that a lot better than he could have done it 10 years ago. So he was like, I'm going to disrupt the company that I built, because I do see a big why not for it.
Okay, so that founder motivation came in huge. We're going to shift to a few founder questions from the chat. We're going to start with Paul Campbell from Moneta Health. And just a reminder to everybody on the call that if you'd like to ask a question, drop it in the chat and we'll call on you over the course of the next half an hour. So Paul, you can take 30 seconds, explain Moneta Health, and then ask your question.
Very quickly, Moneta Health, we're a brain health company. We're building an early intervention platform to treat and manage cognitive decline. We're using voice AI and humans in the loop. So looking at your report, we're firmly in that tech-enabled clinical services delivery, using AI to drive the gross margins. we're focused on the metrics of growth, net revenue retention, et cetera. But are there other macro factors that you're looking at, Sofia and Steve, that you think are sort of shifting the appetite for investing at that next level?
In yours, I might be making assumptions wrong. I do that a lot, but I'd say in your space, like there are some macro regulatory and reimbursement tailwinds that could be really helpful. Like we've been really interested in the guide program and other things around, the sort of neuro space and what's going to happen there. So we're a lot of times when we're making early stage bets, we're often thinking about, because when companies really take off, they get a little bit of luck. And I think in our space, regulatory tailwinds and reimbursement tailwinds could be one. So I think we'd be thinking a lot about that, for sure, with you, and talking you through how you think about that and the things that we should be thinking about that could break your way. Obviously, we're thinking about team, and the team build, and how you're thinking about the building the team, what it is today and where's it going. Because at the end of the day, at the earliest stage, that's what it's all about. People, like, you're going to juck and jive and figure it out, but the people are the ones who help you do that.
One of the things that we've looked at in this space is it is something that is hard to diagnose at early onset, and the role that the PCP plays in the care to identifying these patients. So the question to me for you would be like the acquisition point and like the engagement of those patients. So how do you engage them and are a wraparound service while they also kind of have a PCP as part of the loop and the patient journey? So what do you own? What do the PCP owns? And then the attribution. I think Steve talked a lot about ROI and outcomes at the beginning, and you need to think about who's going to attribute value to what you're providing, what's that attribution, and who's willing to pay for the value that you're creating.
Yeah, like on the one hand, you have a great free, we talk a lot about, we were just off a board call where we were talking a lot about customer acquisition costs. I mean, if you leverage a PCB channel, you have pretty free customer acquisition, but how do you think about disruption and attribution? As Sofia said, it's like a delicate dance, right? But I think there's like a real positive in that for you. And then from a unit economics perspective, i.e. you might not have to spend a lot of marketing, but then there's also the attribution on ultimate value creation. How do you capture that?
Let's jump to Mark Edwards from ViewMind.
Thank you, Logan. Good to meet you, Sofia and Steve. We have an AI-powered technology platform looking at eye biometrics for analyzing functional brain health. It is super accurate, so we think it's the world's first precise digital meter for measuring functional brain health, and it could be used in a multitude of different areas. We are going through an FDA pathway, and we're seeking an unprecedented claim to be an adjunctive diagnostic for measuring cognitive impairment. And we're also pursuing some other adjunctive claims as well. But my question is really about the longevity market. You mentioned in your 2024 predictions report about various different areas that you see growth, longevity being one of them. Was I think the number 5 section that you had in your report. And we're seeing a big growth in that market. We're seeing private equity rolling up a lot of clinics as well. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about, can a startup play in both, let's say, the traditional medical market, dealing more with, let's say, people who have issues and they have health problems and they need care, and more the preventative health market, more let's say, the longevity market?
Well, what I'll say is I think there's an opportunity for you as an entrepreneur and a startup to potentially approach these markets serially and like sort of crawl, walk, run. I think the beautiful thing about the longevity market, and the question is how many people are going to pay for longevity if it's out of pocket, in our space. But there are a lot of people who will pay, and it's private pay. And so, could you utilize that to, have ViewMind be paid for without having to go through all the rigmarole of the, larger healthcare enterprise world that we all live in. So I think that could be really interesting. My instinct ultimately is like, it's a longer path for you to go the FDA route and get regulatory approval and get reimbursement associated with that. But what a great moat, right? I mean, one of the issues with some of these AI technologies is like, I'm a fundamental believer that, the speed of change is all this technology is going to be commoditized, especially if you're selling just straight software. And so I really think like it's all about distribution, but in addition to distribution, if Viewmind could have like a regulatory moat, right, and a reimbursement code associated that, while that path is long and arduous and costly, and frankly, probably fewer digital health investors are focused on that area, I do think it's long term an amazing moat for you. So maybe there's sort of a yes and like you start in the consumer space and then mature ultimately and use some of that cash to fund the business and iterate and get, by the way, our company at Bridge, which probably everybody knows, which is one of the more successful health AI companies that does, automated scribing. They started off as a direct to consumer company because they started before the Gen AI wave. And frankly, health systems weren't going to pay for it yet. So they actually started by giving their product to consumers, many of whom were diagnosed with cancer, who really wanted to record the conversation and have it transcribed so that when they left that really intimidating and overwhelming encounter where they learned they had cancer and all these words were thrown at them, they and their loved ones could listen and see the notes and click into what the terminology meant. So they started consumer. By the way, it helped them really starting consumer is really great because you can really quickly iterate on your product quickly and get consumer feedback. So I think there's a really interesting path for you there. So it's a little bit of a yes and from my perspective.
To add, Mark, I think the key question for me is kind of who, like, thinking about incentives again. It comes down to like what business model path you're gonna take is who cares about the insights that you're providing and who's like bearing the burden of that. And who are you gonna have to convince on the validity of the output of your algorithm? Is it providers? Is it consumers? And they're like looking for this type of data on their own. And if it's the latter, then definitely the longevity path is kind of a good starting point. Is it on the provider side? Because even if you have FDA approval, you will have to earn kind of that validity from providers. So why not start that early if that's the case? And then who's going to use it and who's going to pay for it, I think is another question that you should think about.
Perfect.
So it comes down to that business model.
Nice. All right. Thanks for the question, Mark. Let's jump over to Chuck from NeuroEM.
Thanks, Logan. Hello, Sofia. Hello, Steve. I actually, along the same pathway, except from a medtech device, where NeuroEM, we actually have a device that's been developed for the last 15 years that directly impacts the brain, breaks down amyloid structures and negative proteins, and literally stops the progression of the Alzheimer's disease, cognitive decline. And in the 7 out of 8 patients that we had a small clinical trial with, it actually reversed the effect. Wow. So the question is more about FDA gave us a breakthrough designation. It's a wonderful thing. But in order for us to get the full clinical approval, it's another 3 to 4 year process and multi-millions of dollars. And what I'm looking for is a reaction. I made the decision and I convinced the board that we need to put a wellness device in the market. We can get a wellness device that addresses brain health with a non-medical claims structure in 18 months. We sell 30,000 devices. We generate $100 million in gross margin. That's a lot of money for me to fund my actual clinical trial research. But every time we bring that up, we get this, you're going to do a wellness device and a clinical device. How is that going to work? And I'm just trying to get a reaction on the strategy because I believe you go the wellness device first. That's an economic engine, and it's very profitable.
This is a great question for the whole community. There's multiple companies who have come up against this same challenge and have chosen that route of going direct to consumer with a wellness device while working on a longer tail FDA process. So your thoughts?
It's a really good question. I understand your board of investors' concerns because the two different models have very different capital financing needs and structures of what I understand. And so without knowing a lot.
Yes.
And so I think you kind of gotta, like when I just gave the answer to yes and, right? It's like, I think you gotta kind of choose one route first with in the back of your mind, ultimately, if that's successful, like you can, you'll have gotten some scale and revenue. You can raise the next round of financing where you can, part of the thing could be, okay, we've proven that we can do this in the wellness market. Now let's take it to the FDA. I think to do both, like the tradition, like at an early stage, your investors, and I think I'd have the same reaction, be like, oh my God, like how much is that going to cost? And do we have the capital around the table to support that? Right. So
yeah, not at the same time. Start with the wellness device, the consumer device, generate an economic engine, and then keep funding the research that you need to do for the FDA clinical device.
Yeah, and maybe you can get some non-dilutive funding for the FDA stuff, like, different types of grants or what have you to sort of do some work on the side on it. I think that's probably the route, is my guess. but I think, yeah, not at the same time. That to me would be overwhelming.
And I think the paths to finance those models is different, as you noted. So also your understanding from like different investors fund different types of models. Like med device investors or therapeutics investors understand that you're not going to commercialize a product early on, versus commercial consumer investors are kind of looking for certain other milestones. I think aligning your model and kind of the type of investor that you're looking for is also important.
Let's jump over to Andrew from Cognoscreen.
My name's Andrew. I'm one of the co-founders of Cognoscreen. We're a spin out of MIT and BU, and we use AI on standard of care data. So you can think anything collected in the EMR, you can think blood-based data, voice data, in order to assess the type and stage of dementia that you have. And we're using it right now to augment screening and recruitment for dementia clinical trials. But in the future, we want to use it for, PCP support, physician productivity support, and like population health management. And, some people have reached out to us on that angle, but we're getting some mixed advice on that ROI storytelling perspective that you guys were mentioning before. And for us as kind of a diagnostic esque company, what we've heard is that you need that clear linkage between treatment and diagnostic to really unlock a lot of ROI. And in the Alzheimer's space, as you know, like that is just starting to happen. There probably is going to be a significant gestation period to that point. And for us, as we're telling our story, we have a clear ROI in the clinical trial space that's attractive. But the even more attractive space will be that follow-on market that needs that gestation period, that needs that FDA clearance that we're working towards. So how would you suggest, and I'm certain many of our peers here are facing similar kind of sequenced situations. How do you think we should think about telling our ROI story, or how do you think VCs think about that segmented ROI story?
Yeah, well, by the way, I think you hit on one of the things challenges of the space. I think you've got a pretty good start here, because you've got an initial vein, right? Initial wedge, which is a clinical trial space where there really is ROI. Like they're trying to find the treatments and they need you to identify the patients, and so that's really tight. And I really like that. And I tell you to continue to prosecute that. But I think you have to believe that. And I think this is a good bet. Like that there ultimately are going to be treatments that are going to yield ROI for what you're doing. But I think the good news is you have time, right? You have an initial sort of revenue model and profit model that gives you that time for those treatments to develop. I don't have a better answer than that. It's a question that we ask a lot about the neurospace, honestly, too. Because there is no doubt that the space that last, what I don't know, 4 entrepreneurs is focused on. I mean, like talk about mega trends. Like AI is a mega trend. Like the areas that you all are focusing on are mega trends, and there is a massive amount of need and dollars associated with it. So I think you're all hunting in the right space. Harkening back to the why now of Sofia, like we're interested in this space. So that's a good thing. Like, people are going to be interested. Like it's not this little small space. You're hunting in big territory. And for you in particular, I like the fact that you have a little bit of a wedge to sort of go prove the model. And then, you needed some investors to take the leap of faith with you that there's going to be a treatment. And I think that's a pretty, we are paid to take risk, right, at the early stage as investors. And so like, I feel decent about that risk. And I feel even more decent that you actually have initial revenue model to give you some time for that to develop. So that would be my 2 cents, is like, just keep prosecuting that. And maybe there's other neuro diseases you can look for, right? But, and give yourself time for the treatments to come. They're going to come. I believe that. I'd be willing to take that bet.
One other thing to add is like the ROI question is who cares, because that's who you need to be thinking about the ROI from. So in the case of identifying the patients, who cares is the pharma company. So they should be able to pay and think ROI from that lens. Another place where we've seen dementia and Alzheimer's diagnoses be really relevant is on the risk adjustment side. So the payers and what you do after you've diagnosed those patients, they're going to be the ones who bear a lot of the cost. So they want to know that diagnosis. So thinking about like who's going to care and then aligning those incentives and the ROI for them as you start, I think is very critical.
Thanks for the question.
By the way, maybe some of these, just for what it's worth, maybe some of these folks that are taking on there's a bunch of value-based care neuro players out there Like having I'm just helping you think through other revenue streams you probably already thought, but like some of these folks need to go identify these patients, right? And so
Yeah.
maybe you're diagnostic, maybe that's another revenue stream that you can go pursue beyond just the pharma company. Like I'd be thinking about that, where can you enable people? Who cares, to Sophia's point? Like who needs to find these patients, right?
Collaborate with Paul. I was just talking about identifying patients with them.
Let's jump to a question from Unity Stokes, our Startup Health's co-founder.
Hey, thanks everybody. Thanks Steve and Sofia for being here. I hate to take time away from the health transformers here, but this topic has come up a lot as we've talked about AI and health. You talked about the layer of AI first versus AI enabled. I'm curious how a lot of the solutions that I see getting funded I see really down the administrative pathway of AI, billing, scribing, efficiencies. And then there's this whole other pathway that I think is the clinical pathway, or really, things like drug discovery, or have a whole different layer of risk associated with it. I'm curious how you all as investors think about this. And if you have any feedback in terms of what's really getting funded, those pathways, or are they just completely different types of investors, et cetera? Or if you think about AI and health completely differently from that framework?
Great question. I think and Sophia, you should jump in. I think there's Sophia has she's explored 150 different areas in healthcare where AI could be applied. And there are some really prominent funding rounds, I agree with you, Unity, and a lot of them are in the sort of clinical, on the back office side, the administrative side. I think that's right. I still think there's, talk about a platform shift. I think we're like in inning 1 of inning 9. I think there's a tremendous amount of room to run there. That being said, as a venture capitalist, I try to think about spaces that aren't consensus. By the way, if you're starting a company in healthcare administration AI, and you have a company that's there, it's a great time because it's become consensus and there's a lot of investors that are coming after it, and therefore valuations are high and capital is rampant. That's interesting. So as an entrepreneur in that space, it's great for you. And as an investor, what we have to do is move early. We have to invest in seed and Series A companies, which we're happy to do there, because then you can take the risk of, is it a why now there, and is this the team, and you still can make really good returns. But growth stage in these, some of these comp rounds they're at hefty valuations, right? And we're back to 2019, 2020 multiples. So when it becomes consensus as an investor, I'm just giving the investor view, it's hard to make the outsized returns at the later stages of investing. You can get lucky, you can pick the right one, but it's harder. So now I'm really interested actually in other areas where people aren't hunting. We're going to continue to do a bunch, and Sophia is the person to talk to if you have one of these companies that are in, and she's happy to talk to you about all the areas she's prosecuting in the area. But we also, Sophia and I and others on our team, are looking at clinical AI, and we have also made a number of investments in AI powering life sciences drug discovery. So I think that is really interesting. If you take a 10 to 15 year horizon, I agree with you, Uni. It's not consensus right now. There's a lot more risk. There's a lot more regulatory issues to think through. But I think this is going to happen. If you have cancer now, you want it read by the pathology slide, read by AI. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. And I like looking at those areas. So, and there are other investors that, not just us, that do like looking at those areas. You just have to understand who they are. Khosla is obviously one of them, right? He's done a great job calling that early, and he's, it's proven to be true. So, I think there's a bunch of folks who won't do that, but there are a bunch of folks who will do that. And finding the right investor who will do that is if you have one of those companies, I think there's going to be huge companies built in that space.
You talked about, tailwinds for 2025. In sort of a lightning round, I want you to give a piece of advice to the folks on this call about really how to thrive, how to win, how to come to market, really sort of macro, how to have their best year ever in 2025 based off of some of the things that you wrote in your report.
So I think particularly at the stage that a lot of the companies are here in, kind of seed, Series A, early stage, I think of kind of thinking of your business model as tinkering with all of these little widget and pieces and how one impacts the other, and thinking about kind of how you're building that machine. And I know that's very abstract, but we talked a lot about kind of KPIs and metrics and kind of who's buying and the incentives. And I think there's a lot of nuances, and every business is very different and unique, but really thinking about those and how you're making investments to kind of measure that ROI for yourself and the company, I think will always yield success in our industry.
Steve?
I think I'm going to go back to where I started, like obsessive about outcomes. And from the get-go, have that as your North Star. I think that's what attracts customers. I think that's what attracts employees. I think that's what, for me, at least as an investor, what attracts me. I think that healthcare is hard. Entrepreneurship's hard. Healthcare entrepreneurship's even harder. And so you have to have a reason to get out of bed. And I believe that's why we get all out of bed. And then let's all hope for a little good luck and good markets in 2025 to, provide us some tailwinds. I think those would be the two things I'd say.
I love it. I love it. To the health transformers on the call, appreciate all your questions. Sofia, Steve, appreciate you spending an hour with us, sharing with us both that macro view from your work, which we could have spent 3 hours on, and then also diving into some really specific tactical questions. So thanks for your time.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you so much.
Brilliant.
Good luck. I hope everyone has a great holidays and great 2025.
All right, you too.
For everything you do.
Take care, everybody.